And so, as the mountain mists often obscure the highest peaks, the true beginnings of the Inca, this magnificent civilization we're about to explore remains somewhat shrouded in legend and the gentle, persistent whisper of the wind through the valleys. They didn't just pop into existence, fully formed and ready to conquer. No, like a tiny seed taking root in the harsh, beautiful Andean soil. Their story began with much humbler, more disparate communities. Imagine, if you will, small groups of people, hardy and resourceful, eking out a living amidst jagged peaks and deep, fertile valleys, long before anyone even dreamed of an empire stretching for thousands of miles. These were the Proto-Inca, or perhaps more accurately, the groups from which the Inca would eventually emerge, living in a patchwork of self-sufficient villages across the central Andes, far from the grand stone cities we often picture. Their days were filled with the challenging rhythms of high-altitude agriculture, coaxing sustenance from the thin air and dramatic seasonal shifts, and the quiet satisfaction of shared labor and community life. Now, according to their own origin myths, which, let's be honest, are far more dramatic and satisfying than any archaeological dig could ever be, the Inca sprang from the mythical caves of Pacarictambo, or sometimes from the shimmering waters of Lake Titicaca itself. One particularly popular version tells of Manco Capac and his sister wife, Mama Oclo, emerging from a cave carrying a golden staff, tasked by the sun god Inti to find a place where the staff would sink effortlessly into the earth, a sign of fertile land. This, of course, led them to the valley of Cusco. It's a lovely story, isn't it? A bit like a divine real estate agent guiding them to the perfect plot. But what's fascinating is how these myths served not just as bedtime stories, but as powerful legitimizers of Inca rule, rooting their authority in divine mandate and a sense of destiny. Historians still argue whether these myths are purely symbolic or contain echoes of genuine migrations and founding events. But what's clear is their profound cultural significance. Before the Inca became the Inca, the Andean region was already a vibrant tapestry of diverse cultures, each with its own unique flair. We're talking about groups like the Wari, the Tiwanaku, and the Chimu, who built impressive cities, developed sophisticated irrigation systems, and created stunning pottery and textiles. The Inca didn't develop in a vacuum. They were, in many ways, inheritors and adapters of this rich Andean legacy. Think of them as eager students, observing the successes and failures of those who came before, meticulously cataloging the best ideas in their mental notebooks, or perhaps on actual quippus, who knows. They borrowed architectural styles, administrative techniques, and even religious concepts, refining and often improving upon them with their characteristic organizational genius. For instance, the agricultural terraces and sophisticated irrigation systems that would later define Inca farming were techniques that had been developed and perfected by earlier Andean civilizations over centuries. It's a bit like watching a brilliant chef take classic ingredients and elevate them into something entirely new and spectacular, isn't it? They weren't reinventing the wheel, but rather optimizing the whole transportation system. The earliest Inca settlements, long before the empire, were likely just small agricultural villages, probably no more glamorous than a handful of mud brick houses and some carefully tended potato fields nestled among the rugged terrain. They weren't building grand temples yet, nor were they orchestrating vast public works. Life was simpler, tougher, focused on survival and the immediate needs of the community. They would have interacted with neighboring groups, sometimes trading, sometimes squabbling over resources, much like any other tribal society. These interactions, whether peaceful or not, slowly shaped their identity, their alliances, and their understanding of the world beyond their immediate valley. It's hard to imagine the sheer scale of the empire that would eventually emerge from such humble beginnings, isn't it? It's almost as if a small, unassuming garden gnome suddenly decided to become a global real estate magnate. But that's the beauty of history. The most incredible transformations often have the most understated starts. So, with Manco Capac and his golden staff, or perhaps just a really good sense of fertile land, the small group finally settled in the Cusco Valley. Imagine it, a relatively flat, well-watered basin surrounded by the dramatic towering peaks of the Andes. It was a good spot, strategically defensible and agriculturally promising, a natural incubator for something greater than just another village. In these very early days, Cusco wasn't the sprawling imperial capital we often picture. It was more akin to a burgeoning town, a collection of humble dwellings and nascent agricultural plots, probably with a few grumpy llamas wandering around. The early Inca, still just one of many ethnic groups in the region, began to cultivate the land, build rudimentary structures, and slowly, very slowly, establish a presence that would one day overshadow all their neighbors. They were laying down roots, both literally and figuratively, in this fertile ground, preparing for a future they couldn't possibly have envisioned. Life for these early Cusqueños would have been a constant hustle, a blend of farming, herding, and the delicate dance of intergroup relations. They weren't an unchallenged superpower. Far from it. The valley was home to other local groups, like the Ayamaca and the Pinagua, who were likely just as ambitious and certainly just as territorial. These were the neighbors you might borrow a cup of quinoa from one day and find yourself in a shouting match over irrigation rights the next. The early Inca had to be shrewd, forming alliances when it suited them, engaging in skirmishes when necessary, and slowly, through a mix of diplomacy and low-level conflict, expanding their influence within the valley. It was a gradual process of consolidation, inch by painstaking inch, as they absorbed or subjugated rival chiefdoms. This slow, steady accumulation of power in the Cusco Valley is a mainstream historical fact, often overshadowed by the later, flashier imperial expansion, but it's crucial to understanding their trajectory. One of the quirky tidbits from this period is the idea of Ailu, the fundamental social and economic unit of Inca society. Think of it as a kin-based community, a bit like an extended family clan, who collectively owned land and shared labor. In these early days, the Ailu would have been the absolute bedrock of daily life, providing security, mutual support, and a framework for everything from planting potatoes to building houses. Each Ailu had its own curaka, a sort of local chief, who mediated disputes and organized communal work. This decentralized, community-focused structure was what the early Inca built upon, before they started implementing their grander, more centralized schemes. It's almost like they were running a series of highly efficient, small-scale cooperatives before scaling up to a multinational corporation. Historians still argue whether the Alu system was a pre-existing Andean structure that the Inca brilliantly co-opted, or if it evolved significantly under Inca influence, but its importance is undeniable. As Cusco grew, so did the need for more formalized leadership. From the initial mythical figures, a lineage of rulers, known as the Sapa Incas, began to emerge. But hold on, don't picture them as emperors just yet, sitting on golden thrones and ordering vast armies. In these early centuries, the Sapa Inca was more like a particularly influential tribal chief, perhaps the best warrior or the wisest elder, whose authority was respected but not absolute. Their power would have relied heavily on persuasion, charisma, and successful raids against the neighbors. These early Sapa Incas were less about grand pronouncements and more about getting their hands dirty alongside everyone else. They were figuring things out on the fly, learning how to govern a growing collection of elis and navigate the turbulent politics of the Andean highlands. It's a bit like being the first person to try to organize a community garden. A lot of enthusiasm, a bit of chaos, and a hopeful vision for bountiful harvests. And slowly, these early efforts cultivated not just crops, but the very seeds of an empire that would soon blossom across the vast mountain ranges. Now, if the early days of Cusco were about planting tiny seeds, then the reign of Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui was when those seeds exploded into a full-blown, undeniable forest, reaching for the sky. His story is so pivotal that it almost feels like the real beginning of the Inca Empire as we know it, a grand turning point where everything shifted from regional dominance to imperial ambition. Before Pachacuti, the Inca was certainly a formidable power in the Cusco Valley, but they were still one among several strong regional players. Then came the Chancha, a powerful rival group from the west, who launched a massive invasion of Cusco around 1438. This wasn't just a skirmish, this was an existential threat. The reigning Inca ruler, Viracocha Inca, reportedly fled, leaving the defense of the city to his son, Cusi Yupanqui. This is where our hero, Cusi Yupanqui, steps onto the stage, ready to transform into the legend we know as Pachacuti. Imagine the scene: chaos, panic, the enemy at the gates. Most leaders would crumble. But Cusi Yupanqui, rallying the remaining forces, and even, according to legend, seeing the very stones of Cusco rise to fight alongside him. A nice touch, wouldn't you agree? Talk about divine intervention, spearheaded a miraculous defense. He didn't just repel the Chanca, he utterly crushed them, pushing them back and securing a decisive victory. This triumph wasn't just a military win, it was a profound psychological turning point. It proved his leadership, his courage, and his divine favor. Upon his victorious return, Cusi Yupanqui was crowned Sapa Inca, adopting the name Pachacuti, which translates roughly to "he who shakes the earth," or cataclysm, a perfectly fitting moniker for someone who was about to turn the Andean world upside down. This moment, the defeat of the Chanca, is considered a mainstream historical fact, marking the true inception of the imperial phase. What Pachacuti did next was nothing short of revolutionary. He wasn't content with merely defending Cusco. He envisioned an empire. His reign saw an unprecedented period of rapid, calculated expansion that transformed the Inca from a regional kingdom into the mighty Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. He wasn't just a warrior king, He was a brilliant strategist, an astute administrator, and a visionary urban planner. He meticulously rebuilt and redesigned Cusco, transforming it into a magnificent capital befitting a burgeoning empire. This included constructing grand temples, palaces, and sophisticated water systems, turning what was once a valley town into a city of unparalleled grandeur. It's almost as if he looked at a tiny village and declared, "Right, let's turn this into Versailles, but with more llamas." One of the quirky tidbits about Pachacuti is his reputation for being an incredibly hands-on ruler. He wasn't just directing from afar. He was reportedly involved in everything from military campaigns to the design of new agricultural terraces and even the organization of religious festivals. He established a system of rotating labor, known as mita, which mobilized vast numbers of people for public works, building roads, terraces, and monumental architecture with astonishing efficiency. He also implemented a policy of forced resettlement, mitmakunas, moving loyal populations to newly conquered areas and relocating rebellious groups, effectively mixing populations to foster integration and prevent revolts. Historians still argue whether Pachacuti's reforms were entirely his original genius or a culmination of ideas slowly fermenting within Inca society, but his decisive implementation is undeniable. Under Pachacuti, the Inca refined their approach to conquest. It wasn't always brute force. Often, it was a shrewd blend of diplomacy, intimidation, and the promise of integration into a powerful, prosperous empire. "Join us," they essentially said, "and enjoy the benefits of our vast road network, our organized food distribution, and the protection of the sun god. Resist, and well, let's just say it won't be pretty." This sophisticated approach allowed for relatively swift expansion, bringing diverse ethnic groups and their territories under Inca control. By the end of his reign, Pachacuti had laid the foundations for an empire that would stretch from modern-day Ecuador down to Chile, a testament to his transformative vision and relentless drive. His name echoes through history, not just as a conqueror, but as the true architect of the Inca world. A man who, quite literally, shook the earth and reshaped it in his image. With Pachacuti, the earth-shaker, firmly at the helm and his vision expanding faster than a well-fed guinea pig, the newly conquered territories weren't just tacked on willy-nilly. They were meticulously woven into a coherent, highly structured administrative masterpiece known as Tawantinsuyu. This wasn't merely a geographical designation. It was the very conceptual core of the Inca Empire, translating literally to the four quarters, or sometimes the four regions together. Imagine a vast pie, perfectly sliced into four main pieces, with Cusco, the magnificent capital, sitting right in the very center, the delicious filling holding everything together. Each of these four quarters, Chinchaysuyu to the north, Kulasuyu to the south, Kuntisuyu to the west, and Antisuyu to the east, was governed by a Tukui Rikuk, or he who sees all, a sort of regional governor who reported directly to the Sapa Inca. This hierarchical structure, radiating out from Cusco, was a mainstream historical fact that allowed the Inca to manage an empire of astonishing scale and diversity. This ingenious organizational system was designed for maximum control and efficiency. It wasn't about simply conquering land, it was about integrating diverse populations, resources, and cultures into a unified whole. Each quarter encompassed a vast array of ecological zones, from arid coastal deserts to fertile valleys and high Andean plateaus, allowing the empire to tap into an incredible diversity of agricultural products and raw materials. To ensure loyalty and smooth administration, the Inca implemented a system of decimal organization for populations, arranging communities into units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and even 40,000 households, each with its own local leader reporting up the chain of command. It's almost like they invented the corporate organizational chart centuries before anyone else, complete with clear lines of authority and reporting. Just try not to imagine a llama in a business suit. One of the quirky tidbits about Tawantinsuyo's administration was the dual nature of rule in Cusco itself. While the Sapa Inca was the ultimate authority, the city was conceptually divided into Hanan, Upper Cusco, and Hurin, Lower Cusco, each with its own set of noble panacas or royal kin groups. These dualities often mirrored broader Andean cosmological principles and played a role in ceremonies and political power sharing, even if the Sapa Inca held supreme temporal power. It added a layer of complex, symbolic meaning to their administrative structure, suggesting that even their bureaucracy had a spiritual dimension. Historians still argue whether this dual system was a genuine power-sharing arrangement or primarily a ceremonial one, but it certainly speaks to the Incas' sophisticated approach to governance. Communication and control were paramount in managing such a vast and geographically challenging empire. We'll talk more about the road system soon, but for now, just know that these meticulously constructed roads were the veins and arteries of Tawantinsuyo, allowing rapid movement of troops, goods, and crucially, information. Along these roads, a sophisticated relay system of messengers, called chasqui, ensured that messages could travel hundreds of miles in just days. Imagine these incredibly fit runners, their lungs probably made of iron, sprinting up and down mountain passes, carrying crucial news or quipu records, passing them off to the next chasqui in a specialized hut, like an ancient, high-altitude express delivery service. This rapid communication was essential for the Sapa Inca to maintain tight control over his distant provinces and respond quickly to any challenges or rebellions. The genius of Tawantinsuyo wasn't just in its military might, but in its ability to assimilate diverse populations through a combination of coercion and co-option. Newly conquered groups were often allowed to maintain their local customs, languages, and even their curacas, as long as they pledged allegiance to the Sapa Inca, paid their tribute, often in labor or goods, not money, which the Inca didn't use, and adopted the worship of Inti, the sun god. This wasn't always a smooth process, of course. There were certainly rebellions and resentments, but the Incas' systematic approach to administration, resource redistribution, and cultural integration ensured that Tawantinsuyo, with Cusco at its beating heart, became an interconnected, remarkably resilient political entity, a true testament to the organizational prowess that would define their empire until its fateful encounter with another, very different world. Now, if Tawantinsuyo was the intricate body of the Inca Empire, then its circulatory system, the very network that pulsed with life and allowed its vastness to function, was its incredible system of roads and bridges. Forget the Roman roads. The Inca equivalent, known as the Chapak Nyan or royal road was arguably even more impressive, especially when you consider the truly brutal, often vertical terrain it traversed. We're talking about over 40,000 kilometers. That's about 25,000 miles, if you're keeping track in imperial units, of meticulously constructed pathways, snaking their way across deserts, clinging to sheer mountain cliffs, and even diving through humid rainforests. This wasn't just a convenient way to get from point A to point B. It was a strategic masterpiece, a testament to an empire that understood that control, communication, and commerce depended utterly on efficient movement. This monumental achievement is a mainstream historical fact, often cited as one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. Imagine trying to build a highway system today without heavy machinery, dynamite, or even the concept of the wheel. Yes, the Inca didn't use wheeled vehicles for transport, which makes their road building all the more mind-boggling. They used sheer human ingenuity, organization, and backbreaking labor, often mobilized through the meter system we mentioned earlier. The roads weren't always uniform. They varied in width and construction, based on the terrain and their importance, but they were always built to last. Some sections were paved with stone, others were carved directly into rock faces, and in swampy areas they even built raised causeways. They were graded for drainage, had retaining walls to prevent erosion, and often included rest stops and storage depots, known as tambos, spaced at regular intervals for weary travelers and state officials. It's almost like a prehistoric version of a modern highway rest area, complete with snacks and maybe a gift shop selling miniature llama figurines. But the roads were only part of the story. The true heroes of this engineering saga were the bridges. The Andes are crisscrossed by countless deep canyons and raging rivers, posing monumental obstacles. The Inca didn't flinch. They built an astonishing variety of bridges, each perfectly adapted to its specific challenge. There were sturdy stone bridges where the span was short, pontoon bridges made of reeds for crossing wider, calmer waters, and for those vertigo-inducing chasms, they constructed their legendary suspension bridges made of woven vegetable fibers. These rope bridges, often spanning hundreds of feet, required constant maintenance, with local communities responsible for replacing worn sections on a rotating basis. Imagine crossing one of these, swaying precariously over a dizzying gorge, knowing your life literally depended on the quality of ancient plant fibers. It probably wasn't great for those with a fear of heights, but it worked. One quirky tidbit about the Capac Ñan is that it wasn't primarily for civilian travel or trade as we understand it. While people certainly used it, its main purpose was for imperial control, rapid deployment of troops, movement of government administrators, and especially the incredibly efficient chasqui relay runners, those superhuman messengers who could carry news and quipu messages across the empire at astonishing speed. They had specialized huts along the roads, often within sight of each other, where they'd hand off their vital cargo, keeping the information flowing like a high-altitude telegraph. Historians still argue whether the chasqui system was the absolute fastest communication network of its time globally, but its effectiveness in integrating such a vast empire is undeniable. The legacy of these engineering marvels extends beyond mere practical utility. The Capac Ñan represented the very reach and power of the Inca state, a visible manifestation of their authority woven into the very fabric of the landscape. It allowed for the centralized control of a diverse empire, facilitated the efficient distribution of goods, especially in times of famine, and enabled swift military responses to any challenges. Even today, sections of these ancient roads are still in use, a testament to their incredible durability and the foresight of their builders. So next time you're stuck in traffic, just remember the Inca, efficiently traversing mountains without a single internal combustion engine, and perhaps find a moment to appreciate their unparalleled mastery of both grand vision and meticulous execution. If the roads and bridges were the empire's arteries, then its agricultural systems were undoubtedly its stomach, constantly churning to feed a vast and growing population across an incredibly diverse and often challenging landscape. The Inca didn't just farm, they practiced a form of ecological mastery, adapting their methods to every microclimate and maximizing every scrap of arable land, from sun-baked coastal plains to the dizzying heights of the Altiplano. This wasn't simply about planting seeds. It was a complex, integrated system of land management, water control, and crop diversification that allowed them to sustain millions. The sheer scale and sophistication of their farming techniques, enabling them to produce massive surpluses, is a mainstream historical fact that continues to astound modern agronomists. One of the most iconic and visually stunning examples of Inca agricultural ingenuity are the terraces, those magnificent step-like fields carved into mountain slopes resembling gigantic green staircases. These weren't just for show. They served multiple critical purposes. Terraces prevented soil erosion on steep gradients, created flat surfaces for planting, and perhaps most ingeniously, allowed for the cultivation of a vast array of crops by creating distinct microclimates at different elevations. A lower terrace might be warm enough for maize, while higher ones could support potatoes or quinoa, creating a natural vertical farming system. Imagine trying to build those with just stone tools and immense human effort. It's like building the world's most impressive layered cake, but for food production. But the terraces were only part of the story. The Inca were also masters of irrigation. They built elaborate systems of canals, often drawing water from distant glaciers and mountain springs, channeling it meticulously through stone-lined ditches to their fields. Some canals stretched for miles, traversing varied terrain, a testament to their hydrological engineering skills. And for those coastal desert regions, they employed ingenious methods like puquios, underground canals that tapped into subterranean water sources. These systems weren't just for efficiency. They represented a profound understanding of water management and its vital role in arid environments. It reminds you that necessity really is the mother of invention, especially when you're trying not to starve. A quirky tidbit about Inca agriculture involves the site of moray. Picture a series of enormous, perfectly circular depressions, descending like an amphitheater into the earth, with each level having a slightly different temperature. While its exact purpose is still debated, many scholars believe moray served as a massive agricultural laboratory, where the Inca experimented with different crops and their optimal growing conditions at various altitudes. They could simulate different climates within the same relatively small area, allowing them to develop and acclimatize new varieties of crops to suit the empire's diverse regions. It's like the world's first agricultural R&D center, proving that sometimes the best way to innovate is to dig a really big hole. Historians still argue whether Moray was primarily an experimental station or had a significant ceremonial function, but its design clearly demonstrates advanced horticultural knowledge. The Inca cultivated an astonishing variety of crops, far beyond just potatoes and maize, though those were certainly staples. They grew quinoa, beans, squash, peppers, peanuts, cotton, and various root crops. This biodiversity was a crucial buffer against famine. If one crop failed due to disease or bad weather, others would likely survive, ensuring a stable food supply for the empire. Surpluses were meticulously stored in vast state warehouses called kolkas, strategically located throughout the empire, often on high, well-ventilated hillsides. These granaries served as a critical safety net, providing provisions for the army, supporting public works projects, and distributing food to regions affected by drought or disaster. This centralized control over food production and distribution was a cornerstone of Inca state power, demonstrating their mastery not just of farming, but of logistics and resource management on an imperial scale. They understood that a well-fed population was a stable population, and in the grand scheme of empire building, that's a recipe for success. Now, while the Inca were busy building roads, feeding millions, and generally running a sophisticated empire without the benefit of the wheel, they also managed to develop a truly unique and utterly baffling system for recording information. The quipu. Imagine, if you will, an entire civilization managing its vast bureaucracy, its census data, its historical records, and perhaps even its literature, not with pen and paper, but with an intricate arrangement of knotted strings. It's like trying to run Google using only friendship bracelets. This mysterious system, a mainstream historical fact, stands as one of the most intriguing enigmas of the ancient world. A quipu, or quipu as it's sometimes spelled, typically consisted of a main horizontal cord from which numerous pendant cords hung vertically. These pendant cords could have subsidiary cords attached, and those could have further sub-subsidiary cords, creating a complex, multi-layered structure. The information was encoded in the type of knot, single, long, or figure 8, the position of the knots on the cord, the color of the cords, the ply of the fibers, and even the direction of the spin. It was an astonishingly tactile form of data storage, requiring a specific set of skills to create, and more importantly, to interpret. The individuals trained in reading and creating quipus were known as quipucamayos, highly respected specialists who held the keys to the empire's records. For the most part, scholars agree that many quipus were used for numerical data, census figures, tribute records, inventory of goods in the kolkas we just talked about, and accounting for labor obligations. You could represent thousands, hundreds, tens, and units by the position of knots on a string, much like a decimal system. It's ingenious, really, a portable, durable spreadsheet that didn't require any ink. But here's where it gets truly fascinating and dips into the realm of quirky tidbits. Some scholars, notably the late Gary Urton, have posited that certain quipus might actually contain narrative or historical information, acting as a form of three-dimensional writing system, akin to a spoken language encoded in knots. If true, this would fundamentally change our understanding of Inca literacy and their intellectual achievements. It's like discovering that your grandma's macrame wall hanging is actually a detailed biography. The debate over the linguistic potential of quipus is a prime example of an open scholarly debate. While the numerical function is largely accepted, the idea of narrative quipus is still hotly contested. Imagine the possibilities if we could truly read these historical quipus. We might gain direct insights into Inca history, poetry, or even personal stories, unfiltered by Spanish interpretations. Unfortunately, many quipus were destroyed by the Spanish, who viewed them with suspicion, seeing them as potential tools for rebellion or idolatry. This destruction is a profound loss to historical understanding, leaving us with tantalizing clues, but frustratingly few answers. Despite the mysteries, the existence and widespread use of the quipu system reveal a great deal about Inca society. It speaks to their incredible organizational capacity and their need for meticulous record-keeping to manage a complex, centralized state. Without a system to track everything, from the number of llamas in a given region to the amount of maize harvested, the empire simply could not have functioned. The quipu was their bureaucratic backbone, a silent language of knots that held the fabric of Tawantinsuyu together, allowing them to govern, to plan, and to remember. It reminds us that intelligence and sophistication aren't limited to paper and ink. Sometimes, the most profound forms of knowledge are woven into the very threads of a culture. With the empire sprawling and its knot-based accounting humming along, it's time to peek inside the intricate social structure that underpinned Tawantinsuyu, a system that was both rigidly hierarchical and, surprisingly, built on principles of communal responsibility and reciprocity. This wasn't a free-for-all. Everyone had their place, like a perfectly nested set of Russian dolls, and your place determined your duties, your privileges, and your destiny. At the very apex, shimmering like the Andean sun itself, sat the Sapa Inca, the absolute monarch, considered a direct descendant of Inti, the sun god. He was not just a king, he was a living deity, his authority unquestionable, his every need catered to by a vast retinue. This divine kingship was a mainstream historical fact that legitimized the entire imperial structure. Immediately below the Sapa Inca were the royal panakas, or noble kin groups, composed of the descendants of previous Sapa Incas, excluding the current Sapa Inca's heir, who would form his own panaka. These elite families were the empire's aristocracy, holding key administrative, military, and religious positions. They lived lives of immense privilege, adorned in fine textiles and precious metals, their daily existence a stark contrast to that of the commoners. Yet even their power was carefully managed to prevent any one panaka from becoming too dominant. It was a clever balancing act, ensuring loyalty to the current ruler while respecting the legacy of his predecessors. Below the panakas were the provincial curakas, the local chiefs or lords, who often retained their positions after their territories were conquered by the Inca. The Inca were shrewd. They understood that governing such a vast and diverse empire was easier if they co-opted existing leadership rather than constantly replacing it. These curacas acted as intermediaries, responsible for collecting tribute, primarily labor for the meter system, from their communities and ensuring compliance with Inca laws, all while still looking out for their own people. It's like being a middle manager in a very large corporation. You have bosses above you and employees below, and you're constantly trying to keep everyone happy, or at least productive. Then we come to the vast majority of the population, the commoners, organized into their fundamental units, the Alice, which we touched upon earlier. Remember those kin-based communities. They were the bedrock of Inca society, responsible for collective labor on communal lands, military service when called upon, and the aforementioned meter duty for state projects. Life for the commoner was certainly not one of luxury, but it was characterized by a remarkable degree of social welfare. The state, through its vast kolkhas and sophisticated distribution networks, ensured that everyone had access to food and essential resources, especially in times of scarcity. There was a strong sense of communal responsibility, with the idea that everyone contributed to the collective good, and in return, the state provided for their basic needs. This was a system without currency, remember, so goods and services, particularly labor, were the true wealth. A quirky tidbit about Inca social organization is the concept of reciprocity, Aini and Minca. This wasn't just a quaint custom, it was a deeply ingrained principle that permeated every level of society, from neighborly exchanges within an ayllu to the relationship between the Sapa Inca and his subjects. Aini referred to reciprocal labor exchanges between individuals or families. I help you build your house today. You help me harvest my potatoes tomorrow. Minca was a larger-scale communal work for the benefit of the community, like repairing an irrigation canal. The state also operated on this principle, ostensibly providing protection and resources in exchange for the labor service of its subjects. Historians still argue whether this system was genuinely benevolent or primarily a sophisticated form of labor extraction, but it certainly fostered a powerful sense of mutual obligation throughout the empire. It was a fascinating blend of rigid hierarchy and shared responsibility, a unique social contract that allowed Tawantinsuyu to function with remarkable cohesion for centuries. Having established the intricate social order that kept the empire running smoothly, let's now drift into the spiritual heart of the Inca world. Their religious beliefs, a vibrant polytheistic tapestry woven from a deep reverence for nature, the celestial bodies, and a pantheon of powerful deities. For the Inca, the sacred permeated every aspect of existence. There was no neat division between the secular and the divine. The mountains, rivers, sun, moon, and stars weren't just geographical features or astronomical objects. They were living, breathing entities, often imbued with spiritual power, or huaca, and deserving of profound respect and offerings. This holistic worldview, where the cosmos and daily life were inextricably linked, is a mainstream historical fact. At the very pinnacle of the Inca pantheon stood Inti, the sun god, revered as the divine ancestor of the Sapa Inca and the bringer of warmth, light, and life-giving crops. His cult was the official state religion, meticulously maintained and celebrated with grand ceremonies throughout the empire. The most magnificent temple in Cusco, the Coricancha, meaning golden enclosure, was dedicated to Inti, its walls reportedly adorned with sheets of hammered gold, reflecting the sun's rays with dazzling intensity. Imagine walking into a place where the very architecture seemed to glow with divine light. It must have been an awe-inspiring experience, enough to make anyone feel a bit closer to the cosmos. Alongside Inti, other major deities held immense significance. Viracocha, the creator god, was believed to have emerged from Lake Titicaca and fashioned the world, the sun, moon, and all living things. There was Mama Killa, the moon goddess, Inti's sister and consort, associated with women, fertility, and the calendar. Pachamama, the Earth Mother, was revered as the source of life and sustenance, often invoked before planting or harvesting. Then there was Ilapa, the weather god, responsible for thunder, lightning, and rain, a crucial deity in a land dependent on seasonal precipitation. The Inca understood that a diverse portfolio of gods was best for covering all their cosmic bases. Religious rituals were central to Inca life, ranging from daily offerings to elaborate, empire-wide festivals. Sacrifices were common, typically involving llamas, guinea pigs, and sometimes, in rare and specific circumstances, human beings, particularly children, in rituals known as capacocha. These child sacrifices, often involving journeys to remote mountain peaks, were typically performed in response to major crises, such as famines, epidemics, or significant imperial events, aimed at appeasing the gods and maintaining cosmic balance. It's a sobering aspect of their faith, highlighting the extreme measures sometimes taken in pursuit of divine favor. A quirky tidbit that reveals the depth of their cosmic understanding is the Inca concept of Pachacuti, which, while famously taken as Pachacuti's name, also referred to a cosmic cataclysm or world-turning event. This wasn't just about an individual ruler. It was a belief that history moved in cycles, with periods of order giving way to chaos, and then new orders emerging from the old. It was a profound philosophical idea about the cyclical nature of time and transformation, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of historical change and cosmic renewal. Historians still argue whether the Pachacuti concept primarily inspired Pachacuti's name, or if his transformative reign simply embodied the concept perfectly. But its place in their worldview is clear. The Inca also practiced ancestor veneration, believing that their deceased rulers and important ancestors continued to exert influence on the living. The mummified remains of past Sapa Incas were not buried. They were treated as living entities, maintained in their palaces, brought out for ceremonies, and even consulted on important state matters. Imagine having a family reunion where your great-great-great-grandparents, still perfectly preserved, are guests of honor. This ensured a continuity of lineage and reinforced the divine authority of the current Sapa Inca, linking him directly to a sacred past. Their universe was alive with spirits and deities, a place of constant interaction between the human and the divine, all governed by a rich tapestry of beliefs that guided their daily lives and shaped their mighty empire. Now that we've floated through the Inca's spiritual realms, let's ground ourselves in the tangible beauty they created, turning their rich resources and sophisticated organizational skills into breathtaking works of art and craftsmanship. The Inca weren't just master builders and administrators, they were incredibly skilled artisans, transforming raw materials like gold, silver, stone, and especially the humble llama and alpaca wool into objects of profound beauty, utility, and symbolic power. Their aesthetic wasn't about individual artistic expression as much as it was about state-sponsored excellence, demonstrating imperial power and divine favor. The exquisite quality of Inca textiles and metallurgy is a mainstream historical fact, often cited for its precision and artistry. When you think of Inca art, the first thing that often comes to mind is gold, and for good reason. The Inca, like many Andean cultures, revered gold not for its monetary value. They didn't use money, remember, but for its symbolic connection to the sun, Inti, their most important deity. Silver associated with the moon, Mamakila, was equally prized. The Coricancha, the sun temple in Cusco we talked about, was famously adorned with vast quantities of hammered gold, depicting corn cobs, llamas, and even a golden garden. Imagine a place where every surface gleamed, reflecting light like 1,000 tiny suns. Unfortunately, much of this magnificent gold work was melted down by the Spanish conquistadors, a tragic loss of cultural heritage. But beyond the glittering allure of gold, it was textiles that truly held the highest status in Inca society, considered even more valuable than precious metals. This might seem a quirky tidbit to our modern eyes, but for the Inca, the creation of textiles was an incredibly labor-intensive and highly skilled art form, reflecting social status, political allegiance, and even spiritual beliefs. Fine cloth, woven from alpaca and vicuña wool, the latter being incredibly soft and rare, reserved for royalty, was used as tribute, gifts, and markers of rank. Imagine receiving a finely woven tunic as a diplomatic gift, knowing the countless hours of meticulous work that went into its creation, the intricate patterns telling stories or conveying messages. These textiles were literally woven with meaning. Inca weavers used sophisticated techniques, including elaborate brocading, tapestry, and double weave, to create stunning patterns and designs. Geometric motifs, stylized animals, and abstract symbols were common, often rendered in vibrant natural dyes extracted from plants, insects, and minerals. The Aklawasi, or House of Chosen Women, were institutions where women, often of noble birth or exceptional talent, dedicated their lives to weaving these exquisite textiles for the state and the Sapa Inca. It was a production line of pure artistry, ensuring a constant supply of these valuable items for ceremonies, diplomatic exchanges, and the adornment of the elite. While less visually flashy than gold or textiles, Inca stonework also deserves immense praise. Think of the precisely cut, interlocking stones of Cusco's walls, or the breathtaking masonry of Machu Picchu, fitting together so perfectly that not even a knife blade could be inserted between them, without the use of mortar. This architectural precision wasn't merely functional, it was an art form in itself, reflecting their profound understanding of engineering and their respect for the natural landscape. The megalithic stones, some weighing many tons, were shaped and fitted with incredible accuracy, a feat that continues to baffle engineers today. Historians still argue whether their stonework was more about aesthetic perfection or engineering necessity, but its enduring quality is undeniable. From the shimmering gold of their temples to the intricate threads of their tunics and the monumental strength of their stone walls, Inca art and craftsmanship were direct extensions of their power, their beliefs, and their unparalleled organizational genius. They took the materials of their world and transformed them into expressions of a sophisticated civilization, leaving behind a legacy of beauty that, despite the ravages of time and conquest, still manages to whisper stories of a truly remarkable people. Now, while all that beautiful gold and intricate weaving was certainly impressive, let's not forget that the Inca Empire, for all its administrative genius and artistic flair, was ultimately built on a foundation of military might. They weren't just polite neighbors, they were shrewd strategists and formidable warriors, and their rapid expansion, particularly under Pachacuti and his successors, was a testament to their organized and effective approach to warfare. This blend of diplomacy and decisive military action was a mainstream historical fact, crucial to understanding how Tawantinsuyu grew from a regional power to the dominant force in the Andes. The Inca military was a highly disciplined and well-organized force, comprised primarily of conscripted commoners performing their meter labor service, led by experienced generals, often members of the Inca nobility. Imagine an army that could quickly assemble, provision itself from those very kolkas we mentioned, and march for hundreds of miles along the Capac Ñan, perfectly supplied and ready for battle. Their tactics were often a mix of overwhelming force and psychological warfare. They preferred to achieve submission through intimidation if possible, sending envoys to offer rival groups the chance to join the empire peacefully, promising the benefits of Inca administration, resources, and protection. It was essentially a very polite but very firm invitation to be absorbed, with the unspoken threat of a very large, well-equipped army looming behind it. When diplomacy failed, the Inca resorted to battle. Their weaponry, while seemingly primitive by European standards, was highly effective in the Andean terrain. They used slingshots, able to hurl stones with surprising velocity and accuracy, stone axes, bronze-tipped spears, and machinas, clubs with star-shaped stone or bronze heads that could deliver devastating blows. They also wore padded cotton armor and carried wooden shields for protection. Their fighting style emphasized close-quarters combat and strategic maneuvering, often using their superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain to outflank and overwhelm their opponents. It was a brutal business, but they were exceptionally good at it, like a well-oiled ancient war machine designed for mountain combat. One of the quirky tidbits about Inca military strategy was their use of tambos along the Capac Ñan. These roadside way stations weren't just for weary travelers, they were vital logistical hubs for the military. They housed garrisons, stored provisions, and could quickly resupply marching armies, allowing for sustained campaigns far from Cusco. This foresight in logistics meant that the Inca army could operate effectively over vast distances, giving them a significant advantage over less organized local forces. It's like having a perfectly stocked chain of military supply depots spread out across thousands of miles, ensuring your troops never run out of llama jerky. Conquest was often followed by a careful process of integration. The Inca would bring conquered chiefs and their sons to Cusco for re-education, immersing them in Inca language, Quechua, religion, the cult of Inti, and administrative practices. Upon their return, these newly Incaized leaders would govern their people on behalf of the empire, ensuring loyalty and smooth integration. Rebellious populations might be subject to the Mitmacunas system, where disloyal groups were forcibly resettled to distant loyal areas, and loyal populations were moved into newly conquered territories to dilute resistance. Historians still argue whether the Inca approach to conquered peoples was more about forced assimilation or pragmatic integration, but its effectiveness in maintaining imperial control is clear. Through this combination of overwhelming military force, shrewd diplomacy, meticulous logistics, and strategic integration, the Inca expanded their dominion at an astonishing pace, creating an empire that stretched over 4,000 kilometers along the spine of the Andes. Their military wasn't just about winning battles. It was about securing territory, extracting resources, and bringing diverse peoples under the centralized authority of the Sapa Inca, laying the groundwork for the magnificent yet ultimately fragile edifice of Tawantinsuyu. With an empire of such immense scale and diversity, simply conquering territories and building roads wasn't enough. The Inca needed a robust system of law and justice to maintain order, resolve disputes, and ensure the smooth functioning of Tawantinsuyu. Imagine trying to govern millions of people across vastly different regions without a clear framework for what's right and what's wrong, what's allowed and what's punishable. It would be chaos. The Inca system, while unwritten, remember, no paper for laws, just knots, was remarkably effective, based on strict principles and a clear hierarchy of authority. This systematic approach to governance and justice is a mainstream historical fact, crucial for the empire's stability. The core tenets of Inca law were often summarized by three simple yet profound principles in Quechua: Amaquela, don't be lazy; Amalula, don't lie; and Amasua, don't steal. While these might sound like good advice from your grandma, they formed the fundamental moral and legal guidelines for daily life. Violations of these principles, as well as more serious crimes like murder, rebellion, or insubordination, were met with severe penalties. The Inca state was not one for second chances when it came to maintaining order. It operated on a principle of collective responsibility, meaning that an individual's actions could sometimes reflect upon their entire elu, encouraging community oversight and peer pressure to conform. Justice was administered through a hierarchical system, mirroring the overall structure of the empire. Local curacas handled minor disputes within their alas, acting as a first line of resolution. More serious cases were escalated to higher-ranking Inca officials, eventually reaching the Sapa Inca himself for the most critical matters. There were no professional lawyers or formal courts as we understand them today. Instead, decisions were made by appointed officials based on established customs and the severity of the offense. The process was swift and decisive, emphasizing order and the restoration of balance. It's like a very efficient, no-nonsense neighborhood watch program, but with imperial backing and significantly higher stakes. Punishments varied widely depending on the nature of the crime and the social status of the offender, though commoners generally faced harsher penalties than nobles for similar offenses, a quirky tidbit that reflects the inherent class distinctions. Minor infractions might result in public humiliation, forced labor, perhaps more meter service, or the destruction of one's property. Serious crimes, especially those against the state or the Sapa Inca, could lead to far more brutal consequences, including mutilation, execution, or even the decimation of an entire community if rebellion was involved. This harshness served as a powerful deterrent, reinforcing the absolute authority of the state. Imagine facing a judge whose sentencing options include more potato farming or losing a limb. You'd probably be very, very careful about your conduct. One fascinating aspect of Inca law was its strong emphasis on preventative measures and ensuring social welfare to minimize crime. By maintaining extensive kolkhas and ensuring that basic necessities were distributed, the state aimed to prevent the desperation that often leads to theft or other survival-driven crimes. The Amaquela, don't be lazy principle, also reinforced the expectation that everyone contributed their share, which in turn meant fewer idle hands and less potential for mischief. Historians still argue whether the severity of Inca punishments was truly effective in preventing widespread crime or if it simply suppressed dissent. But the overall peace and order observed by early Spanish chroniclers suggest a highly controlled society. Ultimately, Inca law and justice were integral to the seamless operation of Tawantinsuyu. It wasn't a system based on individual rights in the modern sense, but on the rights and stability of the collective and the supremacy of the Sapa Inca. It ensured that resources flowed, labor was organized, and dissent was swiftly quelled, allowing the empire to function with remarkable cohesion. The rules were clear, the consequences often dire, and the result was an orderly, if strictly controlled society where everyone knew their place and understood the imperative of contributing to the grand imperial project. Having explored the practicalities of Inca law, let's now transport ourselves to a place that transcends mere practicality, a site that continues to whisper secrets from the mountaintops, Machu Picchu. Perched precariously on a mountain ridge high above the Urubamba River, shrouded in mist and surrounded by breathtaking peaks. This iconic citadel wasn't a major administrative center or a bustling city like Cusco. Instead, its purpose remains an enduring mystery, sparking endless debate and fascination. Discovered by Hiram Bingham in 1911, though local Quechua farmers had always known about it, its pristine condition and spectacular setting have made it the most famous symbol of Inca architectural genius, a mainstream historical fact that draws millions every year. So, if it wasn't a major city, what was it? The most widely accepted theory, and one supported by much archaeological evidence, is that Machu Picchu was a royal estate or a sacred retreat built for the Sapa Inca Pachacuti himself, the very same earthshaker we met earlier. Imagine this. After a long day of empire building and not reading, Pachacuti might have wanted a tranquil, beautiful escape, a place where he could commune with the mountain spirits, enjoy the stunning views, and perhaps host important ceremonies away from the hustle and bustle of Cusco. It was likely a seasonal residence for the Inca ruler and his panaka, a place for hunting, religious ceremonies, and diplomatic gatherings. It's like a very, very elaborate mountain villa, complete with stunning landscaping, and one assumes excellent llama watching opportunities. The architecture of Machu Picchu is simply astounding. The precision of the stonework, the way the structures seem to grow organically from the bedrock, and their perfect alignment with astronomical events and natural features like mountains and rivers, all point to a profound understanding of engineering, astronomy, and sacred landscape. The Intihuatana stone, for instance, a finely carved pillar, is believed to have functioned as an astronomical observatory or calendar, allowing priests to track the sun's path and mark solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't just building, it was building with purpose, imbued with spiritual significance, making the most of every sunbeam and mountain vista. Here's a quirky tidbit about Machu Picchu that adds to its mystique. Despite its grandeur, it seems to have been abandoned even before the Spanish conquest. Unlike Cusco, it shows no signs of being attacked or looted by the Europeans. Its remote location and the dense jungle that eventually reclaimed it probably kept it hidden from the conquistadors' destructive gaze. Why was it abandoned? Perhaps the civil war between Huáscar and Atahualpa disrupted its upkeep, or perhaps the demise of Pachacuti's Panaca meant it lost its primary patrons. Historians still argue whether its abandonment was due to political upheaval, a dwindling water supply, or simply a shift in royal preferences, but its quiet desertion is part of its captivating story. The complex is divided into distinct sectors, including agricultural terraces, those clever food-producing staircases again, residential areas for nobility and retainers, and highly sacred zones with temples and ceremonial plazas. The site's sophisticated water channels, which still flow today, demonstrate the Incas' mastery of hydraulic engineering, bringing fresh spring water to every part of the citadel. The very location, nestled between two prominent peaks and overlooking the sacred Urubamba River, suggests its profound spiritual importance, connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld in a symbolic landscape. It was a place where the Sapa Inca, as the son of the sun, could truly feel at home. Machu Picchu stands as a magnificent testament to the Incas' ability to integrate their engineering prowess, spiritual beliefs, and aesthetic vision into a single, harmonious creation. It's a place that hums with ancient energy, a silent monument to a people who built dreams into stone, leaving us with a truly enduring mystery wrapped in a majestic, mountainous embrace. Word count 1,188. Awaiting, continue. Continue. Section 14. Succession Struggles. Huayna Capac's Legacy. Having reveled in the mysteries of Machu Picchu, let's turn our gaze to the unraveling threads that would ultimately lead to the empire's tragic downfall. The Inca Empire, for all its structural brilliance and military might, was not immune to the age-old problem of succession, especially when the rules weren't always crystal clear. The reign of Huayna Capac, Pachacuti's grandson, marked both the zenith of Inca expansion and, paradoxically, the beginning of its terminal decline. He presided over a vast and prosperous empire, expanding its borders even further north into what is now Ecuador, securing impressive victories and ensuring the continued flow of resources. His long and successful reign, spanning roughly from 1493 to 1527, is a mainstream historical fact that cemented the empire's territorial reach. Under Huayna Capac, Tawantinsuyu reached its maximum geographical extent, stretching from southern Colombia down to central Chile, encompassing a staggering diversity of environments and peoples. He was a capable ruler and a successful military leader, consolidating the gains of his predecessors and adding new territories to the north. notably in the region around Quito, which became a second imperial center. He spent a considerable amount of time in these northern territories, often leading campaigns and establishing new administrative structures, much like a CEO who spends a lot of time on the road checking on his various branch offices. This focus on the north, however, would later prove to be a significant factor in the empire's undoing. The problem, as with so many empires throughout history, lay in the question of who would take the throne after the great ruler. Unlike European monarchies with their clear primogeniture, firstborn male inherits, Inca succession was more complex and, frankly, a bit messy. The Sapa Inca typically chose his successor from among his sons, but it wasn't necessarily the eldest or even a son of his principal wife. The chosen heir had to prove his capabilities and, crucially, secure the support of the various panikas and military leaders. This inherent ambiguity in the succession process was a recipe for instability, a ticking time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. It's like having a dozen highly ambitious siblings all eyeing the last slice of cake with no clear rule on who gets it. A particularly poignant and quirky tidbit surrounding Huayna Capac's death is its timing and cause. Around 1527, while campaigning in the north, Huayna Capac, along with many members of his court, succumbed to a mysterious illness. This wasn't just any illness, it was likely smallpox, brought to the Americas by the Europeans and already sweeping through the continent ahead of the actual conquistadors. This devastating epidemic, against which the indigenous populations had no immunity, raced far faster than the Spanish themselves, decimating populations and, critically, disrupting leadership structures. Imagine an invisible wave of death spreading silently across the land, felling even the most powerful. This pre-contact plague weakened the empire precisely when it needed to be strongest. Historians still argue whether the smallpox epidemic was the single greatest factor in the Inca Empire's collapse, but its profound impact on their leadership and population is undeniable. To make matters worse, Huayna Capac's chosen heir, Ninan Cuyochi, also died shortly after him from the same disease, throwing the succession into even greater disarray. This left two of his other prominent sons, Huascar, who had the support of the traditional nobility in Cusco, and Atahualpa, who had spent more time with his father in the north and had the loyalty of the northern armies, vying for control. Huayna Capac's legacy, therefore, was not just one of expanded empire, but also of a fractured succession and a population unknowingly ravaged by a silent, unseen enemy. The stage was set for a bitter internal conflict, a self-inflicted wound that would leave the once mighty Tawantinsuyu fatally weakened, just as an even greater threat emerged on the horizon. The sun, it seemed, was beginning to set on the Inca world. So, with the looming shadow of an unseen disease and a dead emperor who left behind a rather ambiguous succession, the stage was tragically set for the ultimate internal conflict, the brutal civil war between Huascar and Atahualpa. This wasn't just a sibling squabble over who got the biggest toy. It was a devastating clash for the very soul of the Inca Empire, ripping apart the fabric of Tawantinsuyu from within. Huayna Capac's death and the subsequent loss of his designated heir left a power vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped two ambitious half-brothers, each believing they were the rightful Sapa Inca. This internecine struggle, a mainstream historical fact, fatally weakened the empire at the worst possible moment. Huáscar, based in Cusco, represented the traditional heart of the empire. He was the son of Huayna Capac's principal wife, and had the backing of the powerful Cusco nobility and the traditional religious establishment. His claim was rooted in the old ways, in the established order of the capital. He saw Atahualpa as an upstart, a northern-based pretender to the throne, and likely felt that the capital, and thus he, held the inherent right to rule. It was a classic case of the establishment versus the challenger, only with far more elaborate gold regalia and a lot more llamas caught in the crossfire. Atahualpa, on the other hand, had spent most of his life with his father, Huayna Capac, in the northern territories, particularly around Quito. He had cultivated strong relationships with the northern armies, who were hardened by years of campaigning in newly conquered territories. He was seen as a charismatic and militarily adept leader, and his supporters believed his experience and the loyalty of the northern forces made him the most suitable successor. The conflict began subtly, with diplomatic exchanges turning sour, followed by skirmishes, and then escalating into full-blown war, as both brothers mobilized their forces for a decisive confrontation. The ensuing conflict, lasting for several years, roughly from 1529 to 1532, was incredibly destructive. Armies marched and countermarched across the vast Inca road network. Villages were plundered, and immense resources were diverted from the empire's functioning to fuel the war effort. Commanders who had once fought side by side for the Sapa Inca now turned their blades against each other. The kolkas, those carefully stocked granaries, were emptied to feed troops, and the Mita labor force, usually engaged in productive state projects, was now conscripted for fighting. It was like watching a perfectly synchronized machine suddenly decide to start eating itself. A particularly grim and quirky tidbit from this period is the sheer brutality of the conflict, far exceeding typical Inca warfare against external enemies. Acts of immense cruelty were committed by both sides, including the widespread massacre of opposing Panacas and their supporters. Atahualpa's generals, after securing victories, reportedly exacted horrific revenge on Huáscar's loyalists, reflecting the deep personal animosity and the existential nature of the struggle. It suggests that when the polite veneer of imperial order crumbled, the underlying tensions could erupt with terrifying ferocity. Historians still argue whether the Civil War was an inevitable outcome of Inca succession practices or an unusual confluence of circumstances, but its devastating impact is universally acknowledged. By 1532, after years of intense fighting, Atahualpa's forces, led by his brilliant generals Quizquiz and Chalcuchima, finally achieved a decisive victory. Huáscar was captured near Cusco, and Atahualpa became the undisputed Sapa Inca, having eliminated his rival and consolidated his control over the entire empire. He was celebrating his victory, moving south towards Cusco to formally assume his imperial mantle, when a very small, very scruffy group of foreigners arrived on the northern coast, completely unaware of the bloody drama that had just concluded. The Civil War had left the Inca military exhausted, its leadership fractured, and its population weary and resentful, perfectly setting the stage for the arrival of Francisco Pizarro and his small band of conquistadors. The empire, having just survived its self-inflicted wound, was now utterly unprepared for the true external threat that loomed just beyond the horizon. As Atahualpa celebrated his hard-won victory, utterly convinced that the cosmic scales had finally tipped in his favor, a faint, almost imperceptible ripple began to disturb the serene waters of the Pacific Ocean. This ripple was the arrival of Francisco Pizarro and his small, ragged band of Spanish conquistadors, landing on the northern coast of what is now Peru in 1532. Imagine the sheer audacity. Fewer than 200 men, armed with steel and gunpowder, venturing into the heart of an empire of millions, completely unaware of the bloody civil war that had just concluded. This moment, the fateful encounter between two vastly different worlds, is a mainstream historical fact that changed the course of South American history forever. Pizarro, a veteran of earlier, less successful expeditions, was driven by a potent mix of greed, religious zeal, and an almost insane courage. He had heard whispers of a rich empire in the mountains, a land of gold, and he was determined to find it. His previous attempts had been failures, plagued by disease and mutiny, but his persistence was unwavering. This time, he had secured a royal license from the Spanish crown, granting him the authority to conquer and settle the lands he found. He landed with his men and a small number of horses, a creature entirely unknown in the Andes, which would prove to be a significant psychological weapon. Their initial interactions with the local inhabitants were tentative. The coastal peoples, long subjected to Inca rule and perhaps still reeling from the Civil War, were hesitant but curious. They saw strange, bearded men with shiny armor, riding beast-like creatures and wielding weapons that spat fire and thunder. News of these bizarre newcomers began to filter up the Chapacñan, traveling through those very chasqui relay runners we discussed, eventually reaching Atahualpa, who was then in Cajamarca, celebrating his triumph over Huascar. Atahualpa, having just consolidated his power, initially didn't perceive these foreigners as a significant threat. He likely viewed them as a small group of peculiar, possibly even divine curiosities, certainly not a force capable of challenging his newly unified empire. He had just defeated his brother's massive armies. What could a few dozen odd men possibly do? This underestimation, a quirky tidbit of historical irony, proved to be a fatal miscalculation. He allowed them to approach, even invited them to a meeting, perhaps curious to understand their intentions, or perhaps to simply display his own overwhelming power. It's like a colossal dragon inviting a mouse into its lair, just to see what it squeaks about. Meanwhile, Pizarro, with his sharp, cunning mind, quickly grasped the situation. He recognized the signs of internal strife, the recent civil war, and the technological advantages his small force possessed. He understood that a direct military confrontation with the full might of the Inca army was unwinnable. His strategy became one of audacious deception and targeting the head of the snake, the Sapa Inca himself. He meticulously gathered intelligence, observing the Incas' movements and their immense numbers, and began to formulate a daring, desperate plan. Historians still argue whether Atahualpa's overconfidence or Pizarro's sheer audacity was the more decisive factor in the events that followed, but the stage was irrevocably set. Two vastly different worlds, one accustomed to absolute imperial power and the other, driven by conquest and evangelism, were on a collision course. The initial polite curiosity would soon give way to a confrontation of unimaginable consequence, sealing the fate of the Inca Empire and forever altering the landscape of the Americas. The quiet ripple had become a tidal wave about to crash over the land of the Four Quarters. The stage was now impeccably set, the tension palpable, like the thin mountain air before a storm. Atahualpa, having defeated Huascar, was basking in his victory, holding court in Cajamarca with tens of thousands of his loyal warriors encamped nearby. Pizarro, on the other hand, had marched his tiny contingent of fewer than 200 Spaniards, along with a few thousand indigenous allies, directly into the lion's den. This wasn't a fair fight, not in terms of numbers, but Pizarro knew it would be a battle of wits and technology, not brute force. The infamous event at Cajamarca, where Atahualpa was captured, is a mainstream historical fact, a pivotal moment of deception and devastating consequence that effectively sealed the empire's fate. On November 16, 1532, Atahualpa, supremely confident and perhaps still viewing the Spaniards as mere curious foreigners, marched into Cajamarca's main plaza. He was carried on a magnificent litter, adorned with gold and feathers, surrounded by thousands of his unarmed retainers, musicians, and dancers. His vast army remained camped outside the city, a clear sign of his confidence and a testament to his belief that he had nothing to fear from such a small group. He expected a ceremonial meeting, a display of his own supreme power, perhaps even a chance to condescendingly assess these strange new visitors. It's like arriving at a party, convinced you're the star, only to find you've been invited to a very cleverly disguised ambush. Pizarro, meanwhile, had carefully laid his trap. His men and horses were hidden in the buildings surrounding the plaza, muskets loaded, cannons primed. As Atahualpa entered, a Dominican friar named Vicente de Valverde stepped forward, accompanied by an interpreter, and presented Atahualpa with a Bible, delivering the requerimiento. This was a formal demand that the Inca ruler accept Christianity and the sovereignty of the Spanish king. Atahualpa, bewildered by the unfamiliar book and the strange foreign words, reportedly threw the Bible to the ground, perhaps seeing it as an insult or simply not understanding its significance. This act, whether a misunderstanding or an act of defiance, was the prearranged signal for the Spanish attack. With a battle cry of Santiago and the sound of trumpets, Pizarro's men burst forth from their hiding places. The sudden volleys of musket fire, the terrifying charge of horses, creatures the Inca had never seen in battle, and the flashing steel blades of swords caused immediate and utter panic among the unarmed Inca retinue. The tightly packed plaza became a killing field as the Spanish cut down thousands of the bewildered Inca who had no effective way to defend themselves against such a sudden and technologically superior assault. It was a terrifying, chaotic, and utterly one-sided massacre. A particularly grim and quirky tidbit from this day is how Pizarro himself, despite the chaos, directly targeted Atahualpa. While the plaza erupted in bloodshed, Pizarro, with a small group of his most trusted men, fought his way directly towards the imperial litter. The Inca loyalists, displaying incredible bravery, threw themselves in front of their Sapa Inca, trying to shield him with their own bodies. Pizarro himself sustained a hand wound during this desperate struggle, but eventually Atahualpa was dragged from his litter and taken captive, remarkably without a single Spanish life lost in the main attack. Historians still argue whether Atahualpa's capture was an act of audacious genius on Pizarro's part or a complete failure of Inca intelligence, but its immediate impact was undeniable. With Atahualpa, the newly victorious Sapa Inca, held captive, the vast Inca army outside Cajamarca was paralyzed. Without the direct command of their divine ruler, they refused to engage the Spanish, remaining inexplicably inert. Atahualpa, now a prisoner, quickly grasped the Spaniards' insatiable desire for gold. He famously offered a ransom to fill a large room once with gold and twice with silver within 2 months, hoping to secure his freedom. The Spanish eagerly agreed, and for months, gold and silver objects flowed into Cajamarca from all corners of the empire, a testament to the Incas' wealth and their loyalty to their Sapa Inca. But despite fulfilling the ransom, Pizarro had no intention of releasing his prize. The trap, once sprung, was irreversible. Even as tons of shimmering gold and silver piled up in the ransom room at Cajamarca, a chilling realization began to dawn on the Inca. The Spanish were not merely peculiar visitors or greedy opportunists, they were a destructive force, and their divine ruler, Atahualpa, despite fulfilling his incredible promise, was still their prisoner. In August 1533, after a sham trial orchestrated by Pizarro, Atahualpa was executed, ostensibly for treason and idolatry, but truly because he was more valuable to Pizarro dead than alive as a potential rallying point for Inca resistance. His death, a profound shock to the empire, marked the true end of independent Inca rule, a mainstream historical fact that sent tremors through every Ayllu. With Atahualpa gone, the empire was decapitated. Pizarro understood that while he had secured immense wealth and eliminated the supreme leader, he still needed to formally conquer the heart of the empire to legitimize Spanish rule. That heart, of course, was Cusco, the magnificent capital, the navel of the world to the Inca. So, after Atahualpa's execution, Pizarro and his forces, now bolstered by indigenous allies who saw an opportunity to break free from Inca dominance, a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if that new friend was terrifying, began their march south towards Cusco. The journey to Cusco, though relatively short by Inca road standards, was not entirely uneventful. Atahualpa's loyal generals, Quizquiz and Chalcuchima, who had defeated Huáscar, still commanded significant forces and attempted to resist the Spanish advance. Chalcuchima, cunning and formidable, was already Pizarro's prisoner, but even he plotted rebellion. Pizarro, ever paranoid and ruthless, had Chalcuchima burned alive, a brutal act meant to terrify any remaining resistance leaders. These skirmishes were valiant, but ultimately futile attempts to stem the tide, like trying to stop a tsunami with a leaky bucket. When the Spanish finally entered Cusco on November 15, 1533, it was not through a glorious siege, but largely due to internal divisions and strategic alliances. Many of Cusco's nobility, bitter from Atahualpa's victory over Huáscar, saw the Spanish as potential liberators from the northern faction. They welcomed Pizarro, hoping to install a puppet Inca ruler who would restore the traditional order. Pizarro, ever the pragmatist, obliged, crowning Manco Inca Yupanqui, a half-brother of both Atahualpa and Huáscar, as the new Sapa Inca. This was a purely symbolic gesture, of course, designed to maintain a veneer of continuity while the Spanish truly seized control. It was like putting a fresh coat of paint on a house while secretly tearing out all its foundations. A quirky tidbit about the fall of Cusco is the relatively subdued nature of its initial capture, compared to the bloodbath at Cajamarca. The city was not sacked and burned immediately upon entry, largely because Pizarro wanted to preserve it for administrative purposes and to exploit its remaining wealth more systematically. However, the systematic looting of Cusco's temples and palaces began almost immediately as the Spanish melted down countless golden artifacts, destroying an irreplaceable cultural heritage for mere bullion. This act of deliberate cultural annihilation, driven by insatiable greed, stands as one of the great tragedies of the conquest. Historians still argue whether the Spanish fully understood the immense cultural value of what they were destroying, or if their religious zeal and quest for riches simply blinded them to it. The fall of Cusco symbolized the end of an era. The magnificent city, once the heart of Tawantinsuyu, was now under foreign dominion. The Sapa Inca was a puppet, the old order shattered, and the grand system of governance, the very harmony of the four quarters, began to unravel. While pockets of resistance would persist for decades, the political and spiritual heart of the Inca Empire had been conquered. The sun, their divine ancestor, had truly set on the independent Inca state, ushering in a long, dark night of colonial rule and profound change for the Andean peoples. Even after the ceremonial fall of Cusco and the tragic demise of Atahualpa, the story of the Inca didn't simply end with a whimper. Oh no, the spirit of resistance, stubborn and tenacious like the very mountain peaks they inhabited, continued to flicker and, at times, flare into open rebellion against the Spanish invaders. While the formal empire had fallen, pockets of loyalists, led by a succession of courageous Sapa Incas, waged a desperate, protracted guerrilla war from a remote stronghold in the jungle. This prolonged resistance, epitomized by the Neo-Inca state of Vilcabamba, is a mainstream historical fact, often overlooked by the dramatic narratives of initial conquest. The puppet Sapa Inca, Manco Inca Yupanqui, whom Pizarro had initially installed, quickly realized he was nothing more than a figurehead, his people being exploited and their sacred sites desecrated. His initial compliance turned into fierce defiance. In 1536, he escaped Spanish control and launched a massive rebellion, laying siege to Cusco with an army that numbered in the tens of thousands. Imagine the shock and fear among the Spanish as the Inca, who they thought were utterly subjugated, rose up with such ferocity. This siege, though ultimately unsuccessful due to Spanish tactical advantages like horses and gunpowder and the crucial support of rival indigenous groups, demonstrated that the Inca spirit was far from broken. Following the failure of the Cusco siege, Manco Inca retreated to a remote, heavily fortified region in the dense jungle lowlands, northwest of Cusco, known as Vilcabamba. This became the last bastion of Inca independence, a hidden redoubt from which he and his successors continued to resist Spanish rule for over 3 decades. Vilcabamba was deliberately chosen for its inaccessibility, surrounded by treacherous terrain and dense vegetation, making it extremely difficult for the Spanish to penetrate. It was like building a secret lair in the middle of a very prickly, very large jungle. From Vilcabamba, the Neo-Inca rulers, Manco Inca, followed by Sayri Tupac, Titu Cusi Yupanqui, and finally Tupac Amaru Wei, continued to rule a diminished but defiantly independent Inca state. They maintained some of the old Inca administrative structures, collected tribute from their limited territory, and launched raids against Spanish outposts and supply lines. They were a constant thorn in the side of the Spanish colonial authorities, a symbol of defiance that inspired hope among the subjugated indigenous populations and frustrated the conquistadors who yearned for complete control. It's a testament to their resilience that they managed to hold out for so long against a technologically superior foe. A quirky tidbit about the Vilcabamba period is the complex and often contradictory relationships that developed. The Neo-Inca rulers engaged in a mix of diplomacy, raids, and even conversion attempts. Titu Cusi Yupanqui, for instance, negotiated with the Spanish, even converting to Christianity, though perhaps superficially, and allowing missionaries into his territory, all while simultaneously plotting rebellion and maintaining Inca religious practices in secret. This pragmatism and adaptability show a leadership desperately trying to navigate an impossible situation, sometimes compromising to survive, other times striking back with fury. Historians still argue whether these later Inca rulers genuinely sought peace or merely used negotiations as a delaying tactic to rebuild their strength, but their resourcefulness is undeniable. The final act of the Vilcabamba resistance came with Tupac Amaru I. In 1572, after decades of frustrated efforts, the Spanish viceroy Francisco de Toledo launched a full-scale military expedition into Vilcabamba. After fierce fighting and a relentless pursuit through the unforgiving jungle, Tupac Amaru I was captured. He was brought to Cusco, and despite pleas from sympathetic Spanish clergy, was publicly executed in the main plaza. His execution, watched by a devastated indigenous population, was meant to be the definitive end of the Inca line and any hope of native sovereignty. But while the last independent Sapa Inca had fallen, his name, Tupac Amaru, would live on as a potent symbol of indigenous resistance, echoing through the centuries and inspiring future rebellions against colonial powers. The physical empire was gone, but its spirit of defiance had taken root in the hearts of its people. And so, with the last independent Sapa Inca, Tupac Amaru I, silenced in the main plaza of Cusco, the curtain seemed to fall definitively on the grand stage of the Inca Empire. But history, as we know, is rarely so neatly concluded. While the political entity of Tawantinsuyu ceased to exist, the Inca legacy didn't simply vanish with the Spanish conquest. Far from it. Instead, it permeated the very fabric of Andean society, influencing culture, language, agriculture, and identity in ways that continue to resonate powerfully even today. The echoes of the Inca persist, shaping modern Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and parts of Chile and Argentina, a profound and undeniable mainstream historical fact. One of the most immediate and enduring legacies is the Quechua language. Despite the imposition of Spanish, Quechua, the lingua franca of Tawantinsuyu, survived and continues to be spoken by millions across the Andes, serving as a vital link to the pre-Columbian past. It's a linguistic testament to the Incas' unifying power, now a symbol of indigenous identity and resilience. Imagine a language spoken for centuries, enduring conquest and assimilation efforts, simply refusing to be forgotten. It's a bit like trying to eradicate the smell of fresh-baked bread from a bakery. Some things just linger beautifully. Beyond language, many aspects of Inca agricultural ingenuity live on. The terracing techniques, the sophisticated irrigation systems, and the vast diversity of native crops, potatoes, quinoa, maize varieties, are still fundamental to farming practices in the Andean highlands. Modern farmers continue to cultivate crops first domesticated by the Inca, often using methods that have changed little over centuries. The knowledge of which crops thrive at what altitude, how to prevent erosion on steep slopes, and how to store harvests, passed down through generations, ensures that the Incas' agricultural wisdom continues to feed the region. Those ancient farming solutions are surprisingly effective even in our high-tech world. The Alu system, that fundamental kin-based community structure, also persisted, albeit adapted, under colonial rule. While the Spanish imposed new administrative divisions and property ownership, the communal spirit and reciprocal labor practices within Alas endured as a means of survival and cultural preservation. Even now, in many Andean villages, the principles of Aini, reciprocal labor, and Minca, communal work for the greater good, remain vital social practices, demonstrating a continuity that transcends centuries of colonial overlay. It's like finding the original blueprint for a building still being subtly followed, long after many renovations. A particularly poignant and quirky tidbit about the Inca legacy is the way their spiritual beliefs, particularly the veneration of Pachamama, Earth Mother, and the sacredness of mountains, APUs, continue to be woven into the fabric of Catholic practices in the Andes. Indigenous communities often blend Christian rituals with traditional Andean cosmology, creating a unique syncretic faith. You might see offerings to Pachamama alongside Catholic saints' images, or ancient mountain rituals performed in conjunction with Christian festivals. This blending, rather than outright replacement, is a testament to the deep roots of Inca spirituality and the ingenuity of indigenous peoples in preserving their heritage. Historians still argue whether this syncretism is a true fusion of faiths or a pragmatic facade for deeper, underlying indigenous beliefs, but its prevalence is undeniable. The very concept of the Inca, as a glorious past and a symbol of indigenous pride, has also played a crucial role in modern Andean history. Figures like Tupac Amaru II, who led a massive rebellion against Spanish rule in the late 18th century, explicitly invoked the name and legacy of the last Inca emperor, igniting a powerful and enduring nationalist sentiment. Today, the Inca are celebrated not just as an ancient civilization, but as a source of cultural identity and political inspiration for indigenous rights movements across South America. From the majestic ruins of Machu Picchu to the everyday languages and farming techniques of Andean communities, the Incas' enduring echoes are a constant reminder of a powerful, sophisticated civilization that, though conquered, never truly disappeared. Its spirit, like the high mountain winds, continues to blow across the Andes, carrying the whispers of a golden age. As the final words of the Incas' grand story gently fade, feel the quiet hum of their enduring legacy settling softly around you. Imagine those ancient stone roads, now silent, stretching across the sleeping mountains, carrying whispers of Shaski, long departed. The sun, Inti, still rises over the Andes, just as it did for Pachacuti, casting its golden light on the very same terraces where potatoes and quinoa continue to grow, tended by hands whose ancestors once served the Sapa Inca. Let the image of the vast Tawantinsuyu, a tapestry woven of ingenuity, faith, and human endeavor, slowly recede into the peaceful shadows of your mind. There's a certain comfort in knowing that even in the face of immense change, some stories, some spirits, refuse to be entirely extinguished. The echoes of a world built with cosmic vision and earth-shaking effort linger, a testament to human resilience and the profound, beautiful mysteries of our shared past. Now, as the mountains stand sentinel over their ancient secrets and the moon casts its gentle glow upon the silent valleys, know that the story of the Inca, like all the great tales, is not just a chapter in history, but a timeless whisper in the wind. Rest easy now. Let these tales of ambition and artistry, of triumphs and struggles, gently guide you into the realm of dreams.